My name is Hannah. I'm 31 years old. When my mother-in-law screamed, "You'll never bloom here," just because I watered her roses, I didn't fight back. I smiled. I had no idea the garden she guarded so fiercely was hiding a secret that would change everything. When I moved into my husband's family home, I thought watering flowers would be the simplest way to make peace. When Liam and I got married, everyone said I was lucky. Lucky to have found a man so steady, so kind, so devoted. What they didn't mention, what no one dared whisper, was that marrying Liam also meant marrying into his mother's world, Beatrice's world. The Bennett's countryside estate wasn't just a house. It was a monument to generations of pride. Ivy crawled over pale stone walls, roses framed every window, and a wrought iron gate kept the outside world politely distant. I remember stepping out of the car that first day, suitcase in hand, smelling lavender in the wind and thinking, this feels like a dream. Beatrice met us at the door in a pressed linen dress, her silver hair pinned with surgical precision. She smiled, a perfect, brittle curve of lips, and said, "Welcome home, Hannah." But her eyes lingered a heartbeat too long, scanning my shoes, my posture, the way I held Liam's arm. I told myself it was nerves. We'd only met twice before the wedding. Perhaps she just needed time to warm up. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and old wood. Framed photos of Liam's late father, Arthur, filled the hall. Him in the garden, shovel in hand, his arm around a much younger Beatrice. Every image captured sunshine and soil. It was obvious where her heart lived. At dinner, she asked polite questions in front of Liam about my job in town, my favorite recipes, how I planned to help maintain such a big property. I offered to lend a hand with the garden, thinking it might be our bridge. Her spoon clinked against her glass. "Oh, dear," she said lightly, "the garden requires a very delicate touch. Perhaps after you've settled in." I laughed awkwardly. Liam reached for my hand beneath the table, whispering that his mom could be particular. I didn't want to start married life with friction, so I nodded and smiled, pretending not to feel the sting. Days passed quietly. Liam commuted to his architecture firm. Beatrice busied herself pruning, watering, clipping. I'd watch from the kitchen window as she bent gracefully among the roses. Her movements were practiced, almost ritualistic. I wanted to join her, to share that peace. One bright morning, after she'd driven into town, I decided to surprise her. I slipped on gloves, carried the watering can, and began tending the beds beside the porch. The soil was soft, warm against my fingers. Bees hummed lazily around the lavender. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I belonged there. I was humming when her car pulled up. The crunch of tires on gravel made me freeze. Beatrice stepped out, grocery bags dangling from one arm. Her eyes fell on the can in my hand, and her face hardened like wet clay turning to stone. "What are you doing?" Her voice was low but sharp enough to cut the air. I stammered. "Just giving the flowers a little water. The sun's strong today, and I thought—" She set the bags down, every movement controlled, almost theatrical. "You thought," she repeated. "My husband and I planted these ourselves. Each bed has its own schedule. You could drown them." I blinked, unsure if she was serious. "I'm sorry. I just wanted to help." Her lips curled. "You'll never bloom here, Hannah. Not if you keep meddling where you don't belong." The words struck harder than I expected. For a moment, I simply stood there, gripping the watering can like it could protect me. Then Liam's car rolled into the driveway, his timing merciful and terrible all at once. "Everything okay?" he called, stepping out. Beatrice's expression smoothed instantly. "Fine, darling. Just showing Hannah how to care for the roses." Liam smiled, oblivious. "That's great, Mom." I swallowed my hurt, forcing a laugh. "Just learning the ropes." But as we walked inside, I could still feel her gaze on my back. Cold, assessing, triumphant. That evening, over dinner, she was sweetness itself. She complimented my casserole, asked about our weekend plans, even offered me tea. But under the table, her heel tapped a steady rhythm, a silent metronome of irritation. Every glance she threw my way felt like a test I was failing. I told myself not to overthink it. Maybe she was just protective of her routines. Yet the next morning, while clearing dishes, I heard her voice drift from the open patio door. "She's trying too hard. she told our neighbor, Mrs. Wells. Sweet girl, but no sense of boundaries. Some flowers simply don't take to certain soil. Mrs. Wells murmured something polite. I stood frozen behind the curtain, cheeks burning. So that's what I was to her. A transplant that didn't belong. That afternoon, I decided to stop trying to please her. If I couldn't share her garden, I'd make my own. Behind the shed, where the sun fell softly and weeds grew wild, I found a small patch of earth untouched by Beatrice's perfection. It wasn't much, just a square of stubborn soil, but it was mine. I spent the rest of the day digging and loosening the ground, feeling muscles ache in a satisfying rhythm. I planted marigolds, daisies, and a few seeds I couldn't even name. Liam noticed the dirt under my nails at dinner and smiled. You've been busy, he said. Just a little project, I replied. Beatrice didn't ask. After dishes, I went to my room, opened the window, and breathed in the scent of damp soil. Crickets sang in the distance. The house had gone still. For the first time since moving in, I felt a flicker of hope, like my roots might finally find a place to grow. Then, somewhere outside, gravel shifted. A soft crunch. I leaned toward the window, heart beating faster. Another step, deliberate and slow, moving past the porch toward the shed. The night air carried the faint rustle of leaves, then silence. I waited, listening. Maybe it was an animal, maybe the wind. But as I stared into the darkness, I thought I saw the faintest silhouette near the flower bed. A figure bending low, motionless for a heartbeat, before disappearing into shadow. I closed the window quietly, every nerve alert. My pulse thudded in my ears. Maybe Beatrice couldn't stand the idea of my little patch thriving. Or maybe the soil held secrets I hadn't yet uncovered. Either way, I knew one thing. Someone had been out there, and whatever piece I'd been hoping to grow had just been trampled underfoot. The next morning, my tiny garden was destroyed, like someone had stomped every petal just to prove a point. The sunlight looked softer that morning, the kind that makes dew sparkle on the grass. For a fleeting moment, I thought maybe I'd dream the footsteps in the night. I slipped on my robe, eager to check my little patch of flowers before breakfast. But the moment I rounded the shed, my breath caught in my throat. My garden, my small, defiant slice of peace, was ruined. Stems snapped, roots yanked up, petals flattened into the mud. The marigolds I'd planted with so much care were crushed into orange smears. The soil looked kicked and torn, like someone had danced on it in anger. My knees gave out and I dropped into the dirt, fingertips tracing the broken stalks. There was no animal pattern, no paw prints, no burrow marks, just deliberate destruction. I didn't have to wonder long who would do it. My gut already knew. Beatrice. The word pulsed through me like heat. I stood slowly, scanning the yard. Her bedroom curtains were drawn tight. The kitchen window glinted with early light. I thought about the footsteps I'd heard, the shadow bending low near my flower bed. My chest tightened with a sick kind of certainty. By the time I came back inside, Beatrice was at the stove, humming softly while stirring oatmeal. She looked up, smiling that polite porcelain smile. "Morning, dear. You look pale. Everything all right?" I swallowed hard. Someone destroyed my garden. Her brows lifted, just slightly. Destroyed? Oh my. She turned back to the pot, voice light as sugar. Raccoons, perhaps, or rabbits. They can be quite vicious this time of year. Raccoons don't pull flowers out by the roots, I said. She stirred slower, the spoon clinking against the pot. You'd be surprised what desperate creatures will do for food. Liam came in, hair damp from the shower. What's going on? I tried to keep my tone even. Someone tore up my flowers last night. Beatrice sighed, almost theatrically. She thinks it was me, Liam. He blinked, caught off guard. Wait, Mom? No, that's crazy. I didn't say that, I murmured, though we both knew I didn't have to. Beatrice placed a hand dramatically on her chest. You know I'd never touch her things. I was in bed all night. Liam gave me a weary look, the kind people reserve for irrational complaints. I'm sure there's an explanation. Maybe animals really did get into it. I wanted to scream. Instead, I nodded, biting the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. After breakfast, I went outside again, kneeling in the dirt with a quiet fury. Every crushed petal felt like a message. You don't belong here. But if she thought she could scare me off, she was wrong. I cleaned up the mess, retilled the soil, and made a list. The next day, I drove into town and bought new seeds, lavender, cosmos, and zinnias this time, and something else, a small, motion-activated trail camera. I told the clerk I wanted to watch for wildlife. In truth, I wanted to watch for something far more human. That afternoon, while Beatrice napped in her reading chair, I set up the camera near the corner of the shed, its lens barely visible behind a wooden slat. Then I planted again, row by row, hand by hand, feeling the sun on my back and the steady rhythm of defiance in my chest. By the third day, the new seeds were sprouting. Tiny green shoots reached up like timid fingers. When neighbors walked by, they'd wave. Mrs. Henley from across the lane stopped once and said, "That patch looks wonderful, Hannah. You've got a real touch for color." I thanked her, and when I turned, I saw Beatrice standing at the window, watching. Her lips were pursed so tightly they looked bloodless. The next morning, she joined me outside for the first time, pruning roses near the fence. "Such dedication," she said. "Let's hope it lasts longer than the last batch." I smiled without looking up. "It will." Her shears snapped sharply, cutting through the air. "Gardens are like people, Hannah. Some simply don't thrive in foreign soil." "Maybe they just need a little patience," I said softly. For a second, our eyes met. Hers were sharp, assessing, and full of something that wasn't just dislike, it was possession. This house, this land, the flowers, in her mind, they were hers alone. I waited until she went back inside before checking my camera. Each night, I'd review the footage quietly, scrolling through hours of stillness and shadows. For several nights, nothing. Just the wind, the rustle of leaves, the slow crawl of moonlight across the garden. But then, one evening around midnight, I caught movement, a figure crossing the yard. The image was grainy, the night vision coloring everything in eerie green. The person wore a robe, moving slowly toward my flower bed. In their hand gleamed something thin and pruning shears. My throat went dry as I replayed it over. The figure's hair, pinned up, the way she leaned down, examining the soil. It wasn't perfectly clear, but it didn't have to be. I knew that posture. I'd seen it hundreds of times, day after day, trimming roses with surgical precision. Beatrice. For a long moment, I sat there in silence, the glow from the screen reflecting in my eyes. A part of me wanted to march inside, wake her up, and shove the footage in her face. But another part of me, the smarter part, knew this wasn't enough. Not yet. If I confronted her now, she'd twist it. She'd cry, deny, manipulate Liam again. No. I wanted truth she couldn't escape from, proof so clear that even she couldn't pretend. So I kept quiet. I watered my flowers, smiled through breakfast, chatted with neighbors, and acted as if everything was fine. Inside, though, a slow determination was taking root. Each time Beatrice watched me from the porch, I pretended not to notice. Each time she made a snide comment about amateur gardeners, I just smiled wider. The more she tried to push me out, the deeper I dug in. One afternoon, as I knelt in the dirt, I whispered under my breath, if she wanted me wilted, she'd see how deep my roots could go. That night, the air was thick with humidity. Lightning flickered somewhere far away. I was heading to bed when I noticed something pinned to the shed door, a scrap of paper fluttering in the breeze. My stomach sank as I stepped closer, the porch light casting a pale glow across the ink. The handwriting was neat, deliberate. Leave the garden, or leave this house. For a long time I stood there, the note trembling in my hand. The night was silent except for the faint buzz of crickets, and somewhere inside the house, behind a curtained window, I could feel her watching. I realized my mother-in-law wasn't protecting her garden. She was protecting her control. The note stayed hidden in the drawer beside my bed, folded neatly between two blank envelopes. I couldn't bring myself to show Liam. He'd only sigh, try to reason, and end up caught in the middle again. I didn't want him choosing sides. Not yet. This battle wasn't his to fight. It was mine. The morning after I found the note, Beatrice greeted me at breakfast like nothing had happened. Her voice was sweet, her tone syrupy, her words sharp around the edges. "You've been so busy outside," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I do hope you remember to clean up after yourself. Tools left out in the sun tend to rust." I smiled faintly. Of course. But later that day, when I went out to water the flowers, my trowel and gloves were missing. I searched everywhere, behind the shed, under the porch, even inside the old wheelbarrow. Nothing. Then, as I walked toward the main garden, I saw them sitting neatly on Beatrice's potting bench, caked in fresh dirt. Strange, I muttered under my breath. When I mentioned it casually that evening, she blinked, feigning innocence. Oh, maybe you left them there when you borrowed some fertilizer. I didn't borrow any, I said. Her lips twitched into something between a smile and a smirk. Then perhaps the wind carried them over. Liam looked between us but said nothing. Just rubbed the back of his neck and changed the subject. That's how it always went. Me feeling the sting, her pretending confusion, and him quietly retreating into silence. But I stopped letting it get to me. Instead, I poured myself into the garden, determined to make it flourish no matter what she did. And it did. Against every act of sabotage, every petty slight, the flowers began to grow again, sturdy and bright, their colors almost defiant. The marigolds returned first, bold and golden. Then the lavender spread, perfuming the air with calm resilience. Even the zinnias burst open like tiny fireworks. Each time I stepped outside, the sight lifted something heavy from my chest. It was like the earth itself was siding with me. One afternoon, as I was pruning, Mrs. Henley passed by, with her little terrier trotting beside her. She leaned over the fence, smiling. "Hannah, dear, your garden is thriving. I've never seen zinnias that bright. You must enter the Spring Bloom Festival next month." "The what?" I asked, wiping sweat from my forehead. "The mayor's annual contest," she said. "Biggest event of the season. Gardeners from all over town come to show off their work. There's even a trophy presentation. You do splendidly." I thanked her, feeling a spark of excitement. But before I could ask more, a familiar voice sliced through the moment. "Mrs. Henley," Beatrice called from the porch, smiling far too wide. "So lovely to see you." Mrs. Henley waved back, "Just admiring Hannah's lovely patch here." Beatrice's eyes flicked toward me, sharp as a thorn. Oh, how sweet. Though the festival is for real gardeners, of course, those with registered plots and proper horticultural experience. Mrs. Henley's smile faltered. "Oh, well, anyone can apply, I believe." "Perhaps," Beatrice interrupted gently, "but it's a tremendous commitment. I'd hate for Hannah to feel overwhelmed." The implication landed like a slap. I just nodded, pretending agreement. "You're right, Beatrice. Maybe next year?" But later that evening, when I was alone in the study, I filled out the festival application online. I registered under my maiden name, Hannah Carter, just to keep her from finding out. The next few weeks became a blur of dirt, sun, and quiet defiance. Every morning before breakfast, I'd tend the soil, pruning and watering with precision. Every evening, I'd plan new layouts, adding pops of color, layering textures, experimenting with fertilizer ratios. The garden was no longer just a hobby. It was a sanctuary, a mirror of every emotion I couldn't voice aloud. Each blossom felt like a small victory. Each root that took hold reminded me that strength doesn't come from peace. It comes from persistence. Beatrice watched from afar, always with that same polite mask, but I could sense her discomfort growing. The neighbors started stopping by more often, complimenting the beautiful new patch by the shed. I'd catch Beatrice's jaw tighten, her hands fidgeting as she changed the subject. Liam began to notice the tension too. "You two should really try to get along," he said one evening, setting his coffee cup down. "We are," I replied. "We just have different gardening philosophies." He sighed. "Mom's not used to sharing her space. Give her time." I wanted to tell him time wasn't the issue, but I bit my tongue. That night, I heard the garden gate creak open. My heart jumped. I watched from the upstairs window, squinting into the moonlight. The shadows moved oddly, deliberate and careful. I couldn't make out details, but something felt wrong. The next morning, the soil looked strange. Too wet, too heavy. When I knelt down, it was cold and slick, overwatered. The roots of my lavender were drowning. Someone had tampered with it again. And then a faint scent hit my nose. Bitter, acrid. I rubbed the soil between my fingers and realized it wasn't just water. Salt. She'd salted it. My throat tightened. The amount wasn't enough to kill everything at once, but it would slowly poison the plants over time. It was subtle, calculated, cruel. That evening, I set up the trail camera again, this time aimed directly at the flower bed. I angled it lower, closer, adjusting the motion sensor for maximum clarity. Then I waited. 2 nights passed, nothing. The footage showed only stray cats, the wind, and the occasional flicker of lightning in the distance. But on the 3rd night, at exactly 1:07 a.m., the camera triggered. The figure appeared from the side of the frame, robe, gloves, pruning shears glinting faintly. She moved with eerie precision, crouching low to the soil. The lens caught her face as she looked up briefly, illuminated by moonlight. Beatrice. There was no mistaking it this time. Her silver hair gleamed under the night sky, her features unmistakable. She bent down, sprinkling something from a small container. Then she stood, brushed her hands, and walked away as if she'd simply finished another day's work. My stomach turned. I sat there staring at the footage, my pulse pounding. The proof was undeniable. Every frame an admission, every motion an attack. She'd tried to ruin something that had nothing to do with her, something that only existed because I needed to feel alive in this suffocating house. I could confront her now. I could show Liam. I could end this quiet war once and for all. But as I watched the last few seconds of the video, something in me shifted. The fear that had haunted me for weeks turned into a steady calm. This wasn't just about flowers anymore. This was about control, and I was done letting her win. That night, I transferred the footage to my phone and whispered to myself, "Tomorrow, the garden won't be the only thing she won't recognize anymore." The woman who claimed to love flowers had turned into the storm that killed them. My hands shook as I pressed play again. The small glow from my phone screen flickered across the dark kitchen. There she was, Beatrice, kneeling in my garden like some ghost haunting her own creation. Every movement was precise, familiar, almost graceful in its cruelty. The shears glinted once, twice, as she clipped stems that had taken me weeks to nurture. Then she sprinkled something from that small tin. Salt. I watched the footage 3 times before I let myself breathe. I wasn't sure what I felt, vindicated or broken. There was satisfaction, yes, but also a hollow ache in my chest. I hadn't wanted to be right. I'd wanted to be paranoid, dramatic, mistaken. When Liam came downstairs the next morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes, I handed him the phone. "Watch this," I said softly. He frowned, confused, but pressed play. The silence stretched as he stared at the screen, his expression shifting from curiosity to disbelief to something like horror. When it ended, he blinked. That's Mom." "I know," I whispered. "I told you she's been—" He held up a hand, his voice low. "Why would she do this?" "I don't know, Liam. Maybe she can't stand that I've made something that's mine." We both looked up as footsteps creaked above us. Beatrice descended the staircase, perfectly composed, in her morning robe, a cup of coffee in hand. "What's this?" she asked when she saw our faces. Liam turned the phone toward her. "Mom, we need to talk." She leaned forward, peering at the screen, then straightened. "What am I supposed to be looking at?" "Don't play dumb," Liam said. "You're on camera, ruining Hannah's garden." Beatrice's expression barely flickered. "That's absurd." "It's you," I said quietly. She scoffed. "Nonsense. That's obviously been tampered with. Anyone could have staged that, superimposed my image. You think I don't know what editing looks like? Really, Hannah, this is low, even for you." Her calm dismissal hit harder than yelling ever could. Liam ran a hand through his hair. "Mom, why would Hannah fake this? What reason could she possibly—" "Attention," Beatrice interrupted, her tone clipped. She's always wanted to be the center of things. Poor Hannah, the misunderstood wife, the victim of the wicked mother-in-law. It's a tired story, don't you think? I opened my mouth, but Liam spoke first, anger creeping into his voice. "Mom, enough. I saw the video. You're lying." Beatrice's face hardened, the charm draining away. "After everything I've done for you, you'd believe her over me? I was your father's wife. I built this home, this garden, this family, and you'd throw me aside for a woman who's barely been here. 2 years." Her voice cracked just enough to twist the knife. Then she turned, her robe swishing as she stormed back upstairs, muttering, "Ungrateful. Both of you." Liam sighed and sank into a chair, his shoulders heavy. "She's impossible." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Let her think what she wants. I'm done arguing." And I was. The proof didn't need to destroy her. It just needed to free me. So, instead of fighting back, I went outside. The morning light spilled over the wrecked petals, the salt-stained soil, and I made a choice. I would rebuild, again. But this time, it wouldn't be quiet defiance. It would be declaration. Over the next week, I transformed the garden. I installed a short white fence, both decorative and protective. I set up new motion lights and fresh cameras, visible ones this time. I wanted Beatrice to know she was being watched. The work became my therapy. Every stroke of the spade, every planted seed felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I replaced the ruined flowers with new ones, sunflowers that faced the dawn, roses in deep crimson, and patches of wildflowers that danced in the breeze. The soil, once poisoned, now seemed to hum with renewed life. The neighbors noticed. Mrs. Henley waved each morning as she passed, and soon others began to stop by. Mr. Avery from up the hill, the Peterson twins from next door. They complimented the garden's color, its brightness, its energy. "It feels alive," one of them said, "like it's happy to see you." Word spread quickly. Soon people would slow their cars as they drove past, pointing and smiling. I'd see their admiration reflected in the glass of Beatrice's window. She stopped coming outside altogether. Her roses began to wilt from neglect, her once pristine beds overtaken by weeds. The woman who'd ruled this garden like a queen now hid behind her curtains, watching her kingdom slip through her fingers. Liam tried to reach her, but she'd always respond the same way. "I'm fine, just tired." I wasn't naive. I knew this peace was fragile, temporary, but for the first time since moving into that house, I felt proud, not just of the flowers, but of myself. I started to think about the Bloom Festival again. I'd withdrawn from it in my heart weeks ago, afraid of stirring up more drama. But now, seeing how far I'd come, I wanted to stand in that sunlight without hiding behind another name. I wanted to prove, not to Beatrice or the neighbors, but to myself, that I could create something beautiful in a place that tried to reject me. I filled out the new registration form that evening, this time using my full name, Hannah Bennett. It felt symbolic, a declaration that this was my home, too. When I finished, I sat on the porch, sipping tea and watching the golden hour settle over the flowers. The air smelled of jasmine and fresh soil. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying a faint whisper of peace. Inside, the house was quiet. Liam was working late again. Beatrice's door stayed closed. I felt a strange mixture of solitude and triumph, like standing on the edge of something new. A few days later, a crisp white envelope arrived in the mail, addressed to me in elegant script. I assumed it was a gardening catalog or another notice from the festival committee. But when I opened it, my breath caught. It was an official letter from the office of the mayor. "Dear Mrs. Bennett, we are pleased to inform you that you have been selected to represent our neighborhood in this year's Spring Bloom Festival. Your garden has been nominated by multiple residents for its outstanding beauty and community spirit. We look forward to seeing your display at the town square." For a moment, I just stared, reading the words again and again. My hands trembled, not with fear this time, but with something deeper. Validation. I looked out at my garden, the afternoon sun glinting off the petals, and felt tears prick my eyes. The same soil that Beatrice had salted now bloomed brighter than ever. I folded the letter carefully, my heart pounding with quiet joy. Then, from the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement, a shadow behind the curtain upstairs. Beatrice's curtain. I didn't need to see her face to know she'd been watching me read that letter. I smiled softly. Looks like we'll both be seeing the mayor soon. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I pinned the mayor's invitation to the fridge. Upstairs, a door slammed shut, and in the reflection of the window, I swore I saw Beatrice's silhouette turn away, her hand gripping the curtain tight enough to tear it. The woman who once told me I'd never bloom was about to watch me stand in full color. The morning of the festival dawned golden and still, the kind of morning that hums with quiet promise. I woke before Liam, lying there for a moment as sunlight filtered through the curtains, touching the letter from the mayor still pinned to the mirror. My name, Hannah Bennett, gleamed in elegant script. For weeks I'd prepared. Every spare hour went into shaping my display for the festival, a small representation of my home garden. I'd chosen each flower deliberately, roses for courage, tulips for forgiveness, wildflowers for freedom. Every color meant something. Every root carried a memory of what it had taken to get here. When I loaded the last crate into the truck, my heart thudded with nervous pride. Liam came out, buttoning his shirt, eyes still heavy with sleep. "You sure you don't want me to drive?" I smiled. "No, I've got this." He kissed my forehead and said softly, "You're going to blow them away." The town square buzzed with life when I arrived. White tents lined the cobblestone paths, each filled with bursts of color: orchids, lilies, sunflowers, ivy cascading from clay pots. Gardeners from all over the county were there, wearing straw hats and smiles. The air smelled of earth and joy. I found my assigned space, set up my stand, and carefully arranged the flowers. My centerpiece was a large, hand-painted sign that read, "The Garden of Second Chances." People stopped almost immediately. Some leaned in to smell the blooms, others just smiled. Their admiration was quiet, genuine, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an intruder in the world of flowers. I felt like I belonged there. Around noon, the mayor's entourage arrived. Mayor Dalton himself, a broad, cheerful man with a booming laugh, walked from booth to booth, greeting everyone with a handshake and a kind word. When he reached mine, he paused, his eyes lighting up. "Well now," he said, crouching slightly to admire the roses. "This is remarkable. The balance of colors, the texture, it feels alive." "Thank you, Mayor," I said, smiling nervously. "It's been a labor of love." He looked up. "And your name is—" "Ah, yes, Mrs. Bennett. Are you related to Beatrice Bennett, the previous winner from, what was it, 8 years ago?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice chimed in from behind me. "Yes, she certainly is," Beatrice said smoothly. I turned, startled. She stood a few feet away, dressed in a cream suit and wide-brimmed hat, pearls glinting in the sun. She looked regal, composed, like she'd planned this entrance. "Mother," I managed, trying to keep my tone neutral, "I didn't expect you here." "Nonsense," she said. "I wouldn't miss seeing my daughter-in-law carry on the Bennett tradition." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. The mayor, oblivious to the tension, grinned. "Well, I can see where she gets her talent. A family of gardeners. Wonderful." Beatrice stepped closer to the display, running her fingers over a petal. I guided her a bit, of course. She's learned a great deal about proper soil balance and pruning from me. I felt my chest tighten. The old Hannah, the one desperate for peace, might have stayed quiet. But not now. I took a slow breath and said evenly, "Actually, I learned mostly through failure and patience. The soil had to teach me what Beatrice couldn't." The mayor chuckled softly. "Ah, that's wisdom. Nature's the best teacher." A few people nearby nodded in agreement. Beatrice's hand froze mid-gesture. For a brief moment, her smile wavered, just enough for me to see the crack beneath it. I turned back to the mayor. "Gardening saved me, in a way," I continued. "It taught me that even if you're planted somewhere that doesn't welcome you, you can still grow if you keep reaching for the sun." A small crowd had gathered by then, drawn by the conversation and the colors. Someone murmured, "That's beautiful." The mayor smiled warmly. "Well said, Mrs. Bennett. Would you do me a favor and share a few words during the presentation later? I think everyone could use that kind of perspective." Beatrice's expression stiffened, but I nodded. I'd be honored. For the rest of the afternoon, people came and went, complimenting the arrangement, asking about my process. I told them about experimenting with combinations of soil and light, about rescuing plants others thought were beyond saving. Every time I spoke, I could feel Beatrice's gaze on me, silent, cold, unblinking. At one point, she sidled up beside me, her voice a low whisper. "You're enjoying this a bit too much, don't you think?" I smiled without looking at her. It's hard not to enjoy something that finally grows. Her eyes flashed, but she said nothing more. When the afternoon sun reached its highest point, the mayor gathered everyone by the fountain for the award ceremony. A hush fell over the crowd as he took the stage. Behind him, a line of gleaming silver trophies caught the light. He began by thanking the participants, speaking about the importance of community, beauty, and perseverance. Then he gestured toward me. And now I'd like to invite one of our most inspiring gardeners, Mrs. Hannah Bennett, to share a few words. Applause rippled through the crowd. I stepped forward, my palms sweating, my heart racing. But as I stood there, surrounded by color and sunlight, the nerves melted away. Thank you, I began, my voice steady. I started gardening during a time when I felt completely out of place. The soil here wasn't easy. It resisted me at first. But I learned that sometimes the hardest soil yields the strongest roots. Because strength isn't about where you start. It's about how much you're willing to grow, even when no one believes you can. A murmur of approval moved through the audience. A few people clapped. The mayor smiled proudly. I caught Beatrice's face in the crowd. She wasn't smiling. Her lips were tight, her jaw rigid. The pride she'd pretended to feel was slipping away with every word I spoke. When I finished, the applause came louder, fuller. A woman near the front wiped her eyes. The mayor stepped up beside me, shaking my hand. Beautifully said, Mrs. Bennett. A perfect reflection of what this festival represents. As I stepped down, Beatrice avoided my gaze, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. The mayor continued, announcing the winners of smaller categories: Best Arrangement, Most Creative Use of Color, Best Newcomer. Then his assistant handed him a golden envelope. And now, he said, our 3 finalists for the Grand Bloom Award, the highest honor of the festival. He paused dramatically, scanning the paper. In no particular order. Harriet Linwood of Willow Creek, Thomas Grant of Brambleton. He smiled before reading the final name. And Hannah Bennett of Rosefield Lane. The crowd erupted in applause. My hands flew to my mouth, and I felt tears sting my eyes. Liam, standing at the back, raised his fist in the air and shouted, "That's my wife!" I laughed through the tears, turning instinctively toward Beatrice. But she wasn't clapping. She was staring straight at me, her smile frozen in place, her eyes dark with something sharp. Anger, disbelief, betrayal. The applause swelled, but all I could see was her face, tight, trembling, breaking in slow motion. She leaned close as the crowd cheered my name, her voice barely audible above the noise. "Careful, dear," she whispered. "The higher you climb, the harder you fall." Her words echoed long after the ceremony ended, chilling the victory that should have felt sweet. Somewhere inside, I knew the real battle wasn't over. It was only beginning. Success didn't soften her. It sharpened her envy. For a brief, shining moment after the festival, I thought things might finally settle. My garden had earned respect, the mayor himself had shaken my hand, and Liam was prouder than I'd ever seen him. But for Beatrice, my victory wasn't something to celebrate. It was a declaration of war. She didn't congratulate me after the festival. Not once. She came home that night in silence, her shoes clicking against the marble floor like a metronome of disapproval. When I tried to thank her for coming, she simply said, "You looked very comfortable being the center of attention," and disappeared into her room. The next few days, she barely spoke to me. Meals were awkward and quiet. Her chair at the dining table might as well have been an empty throne. Liam tried to keep the peace, filling the silence with meaningless chatter, but the tension was thick enough to taste. One morning, while watering the roses, I overheard voices at the front gate. 2 neighbors stood chatting with Beatrice. I stayed hidden behind the hedge, but her words drifted to me, clear as day. "She cheated, you know," she whispered. "The judges were swayed by pity. Newly married, new to town, that sort of thing. I'd be shocked if she even grew half those flowers herself." The neighbors made polite noises, but I could sense their discomfort. The venom in her tone wasn't subtle. When I confronted Liam that night, he sighed. "She's frustrated, Hannah. She's used to being the talk of the town. Now she feels overshadowed." "I didn't do this to overshadow her," I said quietly. "I just wanted to belong." "I know." He reached for my hand. "Give her time." But time didn't heal Beatrice. It hardened her. By the following week, I'd begun receiving invitations to local events. The Women's Garden Club wanted me to speak at their next meeting. The elementary school asked if I'd help design a small butterfly garden for their playground. It was everything I'd ever wanted: to contribute, to feel useful, to have my work matter. Each envelope that arrived, however, made Beatrice retreat further into herself. I caught her watching me once from the kitchen doorway as I read one of the letters, her expression distant, almost haunted. Then she turned away before I could speak. The next sabotage came quietly, like a whisper in the soil. It started with a strange dryness. My plants, though still green, seemed thirstier than usual. The automatic irrigation system, the one Liam's father had installed years ago, wasn't kicking in. I checked the timer, the valves, the hoses. Everything seemed fine, but no water came. I followed the line back to the main pump near Beatrice's old rose beds. That's when I saw it. The connection pipe had been cleanly cut, almost surgically. The exposed rubber edges glistened with moisture, the way only a fresh slice does. For a long moment, I just stared. The anger came slow, not like fire, but like a spreading shadow. I didn't tell Liam. I didn't confront Beatrice. I didn't even cry. Instead, I went to the hardware store, bought 6 old-fashioned metal watering cans, and lined them up like soldiers along the fence. Each morning, before dawn, I filled them one by one, carrying them to every patch of soil. The work was exhausting, but in some strange way, it was grounding. My hands grew calloused, my shoulders ached, but my flowers thrived. They didn't just survive, they exploded with color. Neighbors began to notice. "How do you keep them so lush without sprinklers?" one asked. I smiled. Sometimes the old ways work best. Beatrice must have seen it too. The irony that her sabotage only made my garden stronger. Every petal became proof that she couldn't destroy what she didn't understand. One evening, I was carrying a watering can back to the porch when I saw her standing by the fence staring at my patch. Her face was unreadable. "They shouldn't look that healthy," she murmured, almost to herself. "They shouldn't," I agreed, brushing dirt from my hands. "But they do." Her eyes snapped to mine, sharp and glinting. "Don't get smug, Hannah. Gardens have a way of humbling people." I held her gaze. Only the ones who try to kill them. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. She turned on her heel and walked back inside. That night, Liam finally reached his breaking point. We were in the living room when he said, "I can't keep doing this, Hannah. I love you both, but she's making this house unbearable." I hesitated. "It's not your fault, Liam." "I know, but it's my responsibility," he said, his voice low but firm. "If she can't be kind, if she can't even try, then maybe it's time she lives somewhere else." My eyes widened. "You'd really ask her to leave?" He nodded slowly. "I have to. For us." Part of me wanted to stop him, to protect him from the guilt I knew he'd feel. But another part, the part that had been trampled, gaslighted, and silenced, knew it was time. The next morning, I found him and Beatrice in the garden, their voices tense but controlled. "Mom, I'm serious," Liam said. "You can't keep treating Hannah like this. If you can't live here peacefully, I'll help you find a place in town." Beatrice's eyes filled with something fierce and wounded. "You'd throw your own mother out for her." "It's not about sides," Liam said gently. "It's about respect." She turned toward me then, trembling. "You've taken everything from me," she hissed. "My garden, my home, my son, everything." "Beatrice," I began softly, "that's not true. I never—" But she didn't let me finish. Her face went pale and she swayed where she stood. For a second, I thought it was another act of drama, another manipulation. But then her knees buckled. "Beatrice!" Liam shouted, rushing forward. I dropped my watering can and knelt beside her. Her breathing was shallow, her lips moving in barely a whisper. "You've taken everything from me." Then her eyes fluttered closed, her body going limp in the grass. Liam's voice cracked as he called for help. I pressed my fingers to her wrist. There was a pulse, faint but steady. My heart pounded as sirens wailed faintly in the distance. I should have felt relief that she was alive, but all I felt was dread, because even as the paramedics lifted her onto the stretcher, her hand brushed against my arm, and her fingers tightened, weak but purposeful. Her eyes opened just long enough to find mine. The look she gave me wasn't fear or confusion. It was accusation. As the ambulance pulled away, I stood in the garden that had started everything. The petals glowed faintly in the setting sun, their colors rich and defiant. But beneath the beauty, I felt something darker taking root. A sense that Beatrice's collapse wasn't the end of the battle, but the beginning of a reckoning. When she fell, I saw not an enemy, but a woman trapped by her own bitterness. The flashing red lights from the ambulance painted the roses in streaks of crimson that night. I stood frozen on the porch as they carried Beatrice away, her frail hand hanging limp off the stretcher. Liam followed close behind, his face pale with shock. I watched them drive off until the siren faded into the distance, leaving only the echo of guilt humming through the garden. It wasn't until much later that I realized how quiet the house had become. The walls, once filled with tension and sharp words, now felt hollow, like the silence after a storm. Beatrice's collapse wasn't as dire as it had looked. The hospital called the next morning to say she was stable, suffering mostly from dehydration and stress. A mild exhaustion episode, the nurse said kindly. She just needs rest and proper care. Liam exhaled in relief, but his face stayed drawn. I should have seen it coming, he said. She's been overdoing it. I bit back the truth, that her collapse wasn't from overwork, but from the emotional walls she'd built around herself. Still, I placed a hand on his arm and said softly, "She's going to be fine." He nodded, but I could see the guilt weighing on him like a heavy coat. Over the next several days, he spent nearly every evening at the hospital. He'd bring her flowers, sit by her bed, and call me afterward with updates. She's resting. She's quiet. She doesn't want visitors yet. So I stayed home, alone. The house felt larger than ever without her constant presence. Her absence was both relief and ache. For the first time, I could move freely through the rooms without her eyes following me. But the silence that replaced her judgment was almost too heavy. One morning, I wandered outside and found myself standing before her half-dead rose garden. The petals drooped, the soil dry and cracked. It looked forgotten, like the reflection of the woman who'd once worshipped it. I knelt down instinctively and began to work. My fingers moved without thought, pulling weeds, trimming stems, watering the thirsty roots. The act felt almost like prayer. Each movement softened something inside me, and as the days passed, the roses began to lift their heads again. One afternoon, while searching for a fresh watering can in the shed, I stumbled upon an old wooden box tucked behind a stack of terracotta pots. Inside were photographs, faded, curled at the edges. In every picture, Beatrice stood beside a man I recognized instantly from the framed portraits in the hallway, Arthur Bennett, her late husband. In one photo, he knelt in the dirt, laughing as Beatrice poured a watering can over his head. Another showed them side by side, planting roses together, her face unguarded and radiant. I sat there for a long time, the pictures spread across my lap. It hit me then. Her obsession with control, her sharpness, her possessiveness, it all began with loss. The garden wasn't just her pride, it was her grief made visible. Each flower she tended wasn't about perfection. It was about holding on to what was gone. For the first time, I felt something unexpected, compassion. That night, as I looked out over the garden, I decided I wouldn't let the cycle of resentment continue. I would rebuild, not just the garden, but the fragile bridge between us. The next morning, I went into town and bought new seeds, choosing the same varieties I'd seen in the old photos, deep red roses, violets, and I cleared a small section beside my own patch. I worked slowly, carefully, until my hands were blistered and my knees ached. When I finished, I placed a small wooden sign at the edge of the soil. I painted it white and wrote the words with steady strokes. Arthur's Garden. Every morning, I tended it. I spoke to the plants softly, telling them stories about the man I'd never met but somehow felt connected to. The section bloomed faster than I expected, as if the earth itself remembered him. A week later, the mayor's car pulled up in front of the house. I nearly dropped my watering can when I saw him step out, flanked by a young assistant with a camera. "Mrs. Bennett," he called cheerfully. "Hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," I said, brushing soil from my hands. He looked around, eyes widening at the sight of the yard. "My word." This is even more beautiful than what you brought to the festival. You've done wonders here." "Thank you," I said, smiling faintly. He gestured to the camera. "We're featuring standout gardens in the next issue of the City Living magazine. Your neighbors have nominated you. Mind if we take a few photos?" I blinked in surprise. Of course not. He and his assistant spent the next 20 minutes photographing every corner of the garden. My patch, Beatrice's restored roses, and the new section I'd built for Arthur. When he noticed the sign, he paused. "Arthur's Garden," he read aloud. "That's lovely. Who was he?" "My father-in-law," I said softly. "He started this garden. I just wanted to keep a piece of him alive here." The mayor smiled warmly. "That's beautiful, Mrs. Bennett. Absolutely beautiful." As they left, Liam's car pulled into the driveway. He looked tired but relieved. "Mom's being discharged tomorrow," he said. "The doctors say she's fine." "That's good news," I said, my heart beating faster. I didn't tell him about the new section, not yet. I wanted it to be a surprise. The next day, when the car returned from the hospital, I was waiting by the porch. Beatrice stepped out slowly, leaning on Liam's arm. She looked smaller somehow, her strength dimmed. Her eyes scanned the garden automatically, as if by instinct, and then stopped. She saw the new section, the roses swaying gently in the breeze. For a moment, she said nothing. She just stared. Then her hand tightened around Liam's. "What's that?" she asked quietly. I took a step forward. "It's for Arthur," I said. "I found some of your old photos. I wanted to honor him, and you." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She walked closer, touching the petals as if afraid they'd vanish. Her fingers trembled. "They're his favorites," she whispered. "He used to plant them every spring." I nodded. "Now they'll always be here." Her eyes glistened. For the first time since I'd met her, the armor fell away. No bitterness, no control. Just a woman remembering love. Before I could say anything else, the mayor's car reappeared. He stepped out again, smiling broadly. "Perfect timing. Mrs. Bennett, Mrs. Bennett. Ah, two of you now." Beatrice blinked, startled. "Mayor Dalton?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. "I wanted to tell you both in person. Hannah's Garden will be featured in the city's official magazine next month. We're highlighting it as a symbol of renewal and community." Beatrice's hand flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, spilling freely this time. "Oh my," she whispered. "Arthur would have loved this." For the first time, she looked at me, not as an intruder, but as family. The mayor shook my hand and drove off, leaving us standing in the quiet garden. Beatrice turned to me slowly, her voice soft and trembling. "Maybe I was wrong about you," she said. Then she walked toward Arthur's roses, her shadow long and thin across the earth, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers that had outlived her resentment. As she lingered there, I noticed her whisper something to the blooms, words I couldn't quite hear. But whatever they were, I saw her shoulders lift, as if she'd finally set down a burden she'd carried for far too long. The house that once felt cold was now wrapped in color and in forgiveness. Spring settled in early that year, as if the world itself wanted to see how our story would unfold. For weeks after Beatrice returned home, the house began to feel different. The air no longer hummed with quiet hostility. The walls didn't feel like barriers anymore. They felt like they were finally letting light through. Beatrice was still fragile, her steps slower than before, but she spent more and more time outside each morning. I'd often find her near the porch, wrapped in her shawl, just staring at the roses in Arthur's garden. Sometimes I'd join her silently. Other times, she'd speak first. "They're thriving," she said one morning, her voice thin but steady. "You've got his touch," I smiled. "Maybe he's still teaching us both somehow." That earned me a small laugh, the kind that startled us both because it had been so long since I'd heard it. As days passed, she began to join me in tending the flowers. At first it was small things, handing me a trowel, holding a watering can. But soon she was back on her knees, fingers digging gently into the soil, face softened by sunlight. It was strange, almost tender, to see her like that. While we worked, she told me stories about her youth, about how she met Arthur at a summer fair when she was just 19, about how they bought this house with money saved from his carpentry work, how the garden started as a single rose bush he planted the week they moved in. Arthur used to say a garden was a reflection of a marriage, she said one afternoon, patting the soil beside the hydrangeas. If you don't tend to it every day, weeds grow in the silence. I paused, looking at her. That's beautiful. Her eyes glistened faintly. I let weeds take over after he died. I thought if I kept the garden perfect, I could keep him alive in it. But all I was doing was choking everything else that tried to grow. I didn't know what to say, so I just reached for her hand. You didn't lose him, I said quietly. You just needed someone to help keep it blooming. That was the moment everything shifted for good. Liam noticed too. The tension that had once carved deep lines into his forehead finally began to fade. He'd come home from work to find us laughing about something silly, the difference between organic mulch and the cheap kind, or how she insisted that pruning roses was an art form that I still hadn't mastered. One evening, he stood on the porch watching us as we watered the garden together. I never thought I'd see this, he said softly. You two working side by side. Beatrice smiled. Neither did I. Soon, word spread through the town about our unlikely reconciliation. People who once crossed the street to avoid the Bennett house now stopped by with smiles and curiosity. They wanted to see the garden that had brought peace to the Bennetts. The mayor visited again, this time with a small brass plaque. I've got a surprise for you two, he said, beaming. After what you've done for this neighborhood, bringing people together, restoring beauty to this property, it seems only fitting to make it official. He unveiled the plaque with a dramatic flourish. The Bennett Garden, in honor of Beatrice and Hannah Bennett for turning loss into life and soil into second chances. I felt my throat tighten as applause rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Beatrice's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. She touched the plaque gently and whispered, Arthur would have been proud. He is, I said softly. From then on, the garden became a local treasure. Children came on school trips, couples took engagement photos near the rose arches, and the local paper ran a feature titled Healing in Bloom. One afternoon, after the last group of visitors had gone, Beatrice and I sat together on the porch, sipping lemonade. The sun painted everything in gold, and the hum of bees filled the air. You know, she said, setting down her glass. When you first came here, I thought you'd erase me. I looked up, surprised. Erase you? She nodded slowly. I thought Liam would forget who built this home. I thought you'd fill it with your things, your ways, your ideas, until nothing of me or Arthur was left. That's why I fought you so hard. I took a deep breath, the ache of understanding blooming in my chest. I never wanted to replace you, Beatrice. I only wanted to grow beside you. For a long moment, she just stared at me. Then she smiled. A real, gentle smile, the kind that made her look years younger. And you have, dear. You've grown beautifully. We spent the next hour trading gardening secrets. She taught me how to tell when the soil was thirsty just by its smell. I showed her how to make compost tea to keep the flowers vibrant. We laughed until the stars began to appear, our shadows stretching long over the garden we'd fought over for so long. A few days later, we were invited back to the town hall. The mayor was hosting a small ceremony to honor local contributors. I assumed it was just another mention, maybe a thank you for the magazine feature. But when he called my name, something inside me stilled. Mrs. Hannah Bennett, he said, your garden has not only beautified our town, it has inspired it. You've shown us all that resilience can take root even in the hardest soil. It is my honor to present you with this year's Grand Bloom Award. Applause filled the hall. Beatrice stood beside me, clapping the loudest, her eyes shining. When I turned to her, she reached for my hand. You did it, she whispered. You finally bloomed. Tears blurred my vision. We did it, I corrected. As the mayor handed me the crystal trophy, flashes from photographers lit up the room. He raised his hand for quiet and added, This award isn't just for beauty. It's for what beauty represents: strength, forgiveness, and community. I gave a short speech, thanking everyone for their support and ending with the same words I'd said at the festival. Sometimes the hardest soil yields the strongest roots. The applause came again, warm and thunderous. I looked out into the crowd. my eyes finding Liam's proud smile, and then Beatrice, beaming. For the first time, I saw in her not a rival, not a guardian of the past, but a reflection of what I hoped to become, a woman who learned to let things grow, even after loss. When the ceremony ended, people swarmed around us, congratulating, hugging, shaking hands. I posed for pictures, the trophy glinting in my arms, laughter echoing through the hall. As the crowd began to thin, Beatrice leaned close, her hand wrapping around mine. Her voice dropped to a whisper, trembling with something I couldn't quite name. "There's one more secret you should know about this soil." I froze, still smiling for a final photo. Her words hung between us like a shadow over the light. "What do you mean?" I asked quietly, turning toward her. But before she could answer, someone called my name from across the room, pulling my attention away for just a moment. When I turned back, Beatrice was still smiling, but her eyes looked distant, as if she were standing somewhere far beyond the applause. Her hand tightened around mine, her gaze flickering toward the garden, visible through the window. "We should talk when we get home," she said softly. "There's something buried there, something you deserve to know." I thought I had uncovered every root, but this one ran deeper than I ever imagined. The night after the ceremony, the air was heavy with spring rain. I couldn't sleep. Beatrice's words kept echoing in my mind. "There's one more secret you should know about this soil." I waited until the house went quiet, then peeked into her room. Her door was slightly ajar, the lamp still on. She sat on the edge of the bed, holding a framed photograph of Arthur, her eyes distant but calm. When she noticed me, she smiled softly. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked. I shook my head. "You said there was something I should—" "No." She patted the space beside her. "Sit, dear. It's time." I perched on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of her words before she even began. "You've probably wondered why I was so possessive of this garden," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of the photo frame. "Why I guarded it like a dragon sitting on treasure." I hesitated, then nodded. "I did, but I thought maybe it was just grief." She smiled faintly. "It was, but grief can take strange shapes. It can turn love into something unrecognizable." For a moment, the only sound was the rain against the window. Then, with a trembling breath, she said, "Arthur's ashes are buried here." My heart stilled. "What?" "Under the oldest rose bush," she whispered, "the one near the garden gate. I never told anyone, not even Liam. When he died, I couldn't bear the thought of him being locked away in some cold mausoleum. He loved this land. He built it with his hands, bled for it. So I brought him home." I didn't know what to say. My eyes filled before I could stop them. Suddenly everything made sense. The obsession, the outbursts, the fear of letting anyone near the soil. She hadn't been protecting roses. She'd been protecting him. "Beatrice," I said softly, taking her hand. "You've been carrying that alone all these years?" Her chin quivered, and she nodded. "I thought if I kept it perfect, if I didn't let anyone touch it, he'd stay close. When you started changing things, when you made it your own, I thought you were replacing him, replacing me." The sadness in her voice broke something open in me. I squeezed her hand. "You weren't wrong to love him like that. But he's not gone, Beatrice. He's in everything that's grown here. I feel it when I water the flowers." Her tears came then, quiet and unguarded. She leaned into me, and for the first time since I'd met her, I held her not as a rival, not even as a mother-in-law, but as a woman who'd simply loved and lost. When the rain stopped, we went outside together, barefoot and silent. The moon peeked through the clouds, casting a silver glow across the garden. She led me to the rosebush, its blooms pale and heavy with dew. "This is where he rests," she whispered, kneeling in the damp grass. Every year on our anniversary, I'd place one fresh rose here, but I think maybe it's time he shared this place with you. I knelt beside her, my hand brushing the petals. "Then let's honor him together." The next morning we built a small wooden plaque. Liam helped sand the edges, while Beatrice painted the words in neat, careful letters. "In loving memory of Arthur Bennett. May love forever take root." When we placed it by the rose bush, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just a garden anymore. It was a story written in soil, a memory that had room for both loss and new beginnings. From that day on, everything bloomed brighter. Liam suggested expanding the garden further into the unused part of the estate, the old orchard that had gone wild with vines. Together, the three of us cleared the weeds and turned the ground over, planting new life where there had once been decay. It felt symbolic, reclaiming what had been forgotten. Word spread quickly. The mayor returned again, this time not for awards, but to celebrate. "You Bennetts," he said with a grin, "have turned this town into a garden-loving community. We've even started planning a neighborhood flower walk next spring. You've inspired us all," I laughed. "We just wanted to grow something good." Beatrice smiled at that. "And you have, dear. You truly have." By summer, the house became a hub of life. Visitors arrived weekly, students, widows, young couples, each one eager to learn. I decided to start a small community gardening club, focusing on connection and healing. I called it Bloom Again. At first, it was just a few neighbors, but soon women from nearby towns joined too. Some came after losing husbands, some after divorces, others simply seeking peace. Together, we learned that tending the earth could mend more than just broken soil. It could mend broken hearts. Beatrice became our honorary mentor. She'd sit in her chair under the oak tree, giving advice, telling stories about Arthur, correcting our technique with her trademark precision. But her tone had softened. Her corrections carried warmth now, not pride. One afternoon, I overheard her telling a young widow, "Gardens don't forgive easily, but they do forget pain if you give them enough sun." I smiled to myself, recognizing in her words a mirror of the woman she'd become, still strong, but gentler, rooted in grace. The mayor later held a small ribbon-cutting ceremony to officially open the Bennett Garden as a town landmark. The plaque gleamed beneath the sunlight, surrounded by roses, tulips, and lavender. As people toured, I watched Beatrice laughing with the mayor, her once cold eyes now full of warmth. When the crowd dispersed, I stood by Arthur's rose bush, watching the petals sway in the breeze. Beatrice joined me, resting her hand on my shoulder. "You know," she said softly, "Arthur always said a garden is never truly finished. It grows as long as someone loves it enough to keep tending." I nodded. "Then we'll never let it end." We stood there for a while, saying nothing, the air filled with the hum of bees and the soft rustle of leaves. The garden glowed golden in the afternoon light, a tapestry of every emotion we'd survived: pain, forgiveness, growth. Later, as evening settled, I wrote the opening announcement for Bloom Again's new newsletter. At the top, I placed our motto, "Even the cruelest storms can bring new growth." When I looked up, Beatrice was watering the lilies beside the porch. She turned to me, her smile small but real, and for the first time, I saw not the woman who'd once said I'd never bloom here, but the one who'd finally learned to bloom beside me. As the camera of life panned out in my mind, I imagined the view from above, the house glowing softly, the gardens sprawling in full color, and two women, once enemies, watering flowers side by side. The air shimmered with light and promise. And as the last drops fell from my watering can, I whispered the words that had defined our journey from the very beginning. I watered her flowers, and she said I'd never bloom here. But now, this whole town blossoms with us. In the end, it wasn't revenge that made me bloom. It was forgiveness. The same soil that once divided us became the ground that finally brought us together. I learned that even the coldest hearts can soften when watered with patience. Beatrice taught me that love doesn't die. It simply changes how it grows. I watered her flowers, and she said I'd never bloom here. But now, this entire town blossoms with us. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to share it with someone who believes in second chances. Every like helps another story like this bloom, and your support keeps our garden of stories growing. Subscribe if you believe that kindness and patience can change even the hardest hearts. And tell me, if you were in my place, would you have forgiven her or walked away forever?